She's obviously from New Brunswick, but she has been working across Canada to recruit our youth into boots, not suits, so that we can build the economy of the future, make our country strong again to stand up against American economic aggression. And here we are in St. John, not by any coincidence. We're in this place because it symbolizes both our long history and our optimistic future. This is the place where we come to move our products over the Atlantic to the world. It is one of the great cities of the Atlantic that will be greater still and bigger and bolder into the future. Well, it's here today that we reflect upon the great East-West nation that John A. MacDonald dreamt of and began building. That's why Louis St.Laurent built the Saint Lawrence Seaway to open up the Canadian heartland to the world. These projects boosted our economy and guaranteed our economic independence. But I have a question. Do you think we could get the Saint Lawrence Seaway open today? Do you think we could build the Canadian Pacific Railway today? Really, think about it. There'd be some environmental extremist like Steven Guilbeault, or maybe Gregor Robertson, the new Liberal candidate, former Vancouver mayor, who'd be chaining themselves to a tree to prevent it from happening. And it would take a decade to go through a bureaucratic process that would never lead anywhere. How many projects have the Liberals killed already? 16 major energy projects, $176 billion that we know of. There were 18 LNG liquefaction plants proposed 10 years ago when the Liberals took office. Not one has been completed. The only one that's close was approved by the previous Harper government. They blocked two major pipelines, both the Energy East and the Northern Gateway pipeline. Mr. Carney testified in committee against the Northern Gateway pipeline, which would have allowed us to move 500,000 barrels of oil to Asia every single day. Now that oil goes to the Americans at a discount, making us even more dependent on what is now a very aggressive southern neighbor. It is time to reverse the lost Liberal decade of blocking projects and moving money out of the country. It is time to take back control and relaunch our economy, to unleash our energy sector and bring home our jobs and powerful paychecks. It is time to turn Canada into an economic fortress that puts our country first for a change. With Donald Trump threatening our country with tariffs, we need big projects that link our regions east to west. We need to be able to get our resources across Canada, bypassing America, so we can trade more with each other and sell our resources to the world. Under the Liberals, this kind of big thinking has become impossible. The average time it takes to get a mine approved is 17 years, 23% longer than Australia, 38% longer than in the U.S. Canada now ranks 23rd in the World Bank's ease of doing business. We fall in 7 places. We're the second slowest country in all of the 36-nation OECD to get a building permit, the second slowest. The Liberals' radical keep-it-in-the-ground agenda killed 16 major energy projects and billions of dollars. And then think of the number of businesses from around the world who don't even bother proposing a project in Canada because it is a waste of time and money under the Liberals' keep-it-in-the-ground economic policy. Since the Liberals killed the Energy East pipeline, and let's make no mistake, they did kill the Energy East pipeline. You know, they'll claim that TransCanada just changed its mind. Really? So the company spent $1 billion on getting the project approved, only to sort of one day say, oh boy, the price of oil has gone down this week, we're going to cancel the whole thing. Give me a break. This is a 100-year investment. It doesn't get canceled because the weekly price of oil went down. It got canceled because the Liberals changed the rules in the middle of the game. And let's be clear, Liberal No New Pipelines Law C-69 will make it impossible for any other project to ever get approved in this country. And Mark Carney could have repealed that law. I encouraged him to reconvene Parliament after he won the Liberal leadership race and quickly, under emergency conditions, repeal C-69. He didn't do it. So it doesn't matter what he says about the law now. We know he doesn't mean it, because he could have done it. It is a Liberal law that they passed, that they brought in, and that they have defended. And it is the same Liberal ministers, same Liberal MPs, same Liberal strategists, same Liberal promises that they made 10 years ago. If you vote the same, you will get the same by re-electing the same Liberal gang. The only difference now is they have a weaker and more compromised Liberal leader. While Mr. Carney was advisor to Justin Trudeau, he supported all of the same radical keep-it-in-the-ground policies, but not only because he believes in it, because he profited from it. By pushing resource projects out of Canada, his investments overseas and in the States become more profitable. Less competition from Canada means globalist elites like him get richer and fatter. He supported his entire business career, so-called business career, was about defunding Canadian energy, convincing banks to stop lending to Canadian energy companies. He supported C-69. He still supports the energy cap. Just last week, one of his ministers said that they were going to keep in place a cap on Canadian energy production that doesn't apply in the United States. Even more billions will leave the country under that policy. Mr. Carney says he supports an industrial carbon tax. Again, a tax that applies on Canadian businesses but not on American ones, which will, this is another area where Mr. Carney and Mr. Trump agree. Both want to tax Canadian industry. With Carney, it's a carbon tax. With Trump, it's a tariff. But the effect is the same. It will drive tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars south of the border because there is no such tax on the U.S. side. Mr. Carney supports the same policies that have driven $500 billion out of our country over the last decade of the lost Liberal period. And he will say anything he has to. He lied about the fact that he plagiarized 10 times in his thesis in order to get his degree. He lied about having moved his headquarters from Canada to the U.S. just 6 days after Trump threatened tariffs on our country. So you can count on him to say whatever he has to say in order to hold on and get the Liberals that fourth term in power. But under the Liberals, applications are lengthy and the economy is crashing. Why would any other company invest in this country with a long Liberal record of high taxes and blocking projects? But the good news is we don't have to, after this lost Liberal decade, we don't have to elect them to a fourth term. We can choose change by putting Canada first with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources, and bring home paychecks and production so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength. Today, I'm unveiling yet another concrete proposal to bring about that vision. Today, I'm announcing the Canada First National Energy Corridor, a pre-approved corridor that will allow our incredible businesses to build pipelines, transmission lines, rail lines, and countless other kinds of infrastructure that we need to break our dependence on the Americans, ship our resources to ourselves and overseas markets, bring home powerful paychecks for our country, and stand up for ourselves in a position of strength. Here's how it would work. First, we would use the model of the shovel-ready zone. That is to say, the permits would be pre-authorized. After consultations and environmental research, we would find the path that is safe for our citizens and for nature. Second, we would consult with First Nations, as is our duty under the Constitution of Canada. Third, we would lock down the permits and we would publish specifications and standards that companies have to meet so that they would do the projects in a responsible way that keeps everyone safe. Then the permits would be pre-published online and legally binding. In other words, the government would not have the legal right to reverse course and change its mind. This would remove the uncertainty. I understand why businesses after the lost Liberal decade would not want to take the risk of starting an application process that could cost them billions of dollars if they thought that maybe a future government would reverse course. That's why pre-approval is so important. Pre-approving the project would mean that the companies could invest with certainty, knowing what they have to do and what they can build. This certainty will allow the private sector to do the building. It will allow our businesses to invest, hire, and grow. It would also allow us to become independent from the Americans, going around them directly to ourselves and to others. We can build Canadian pipelines with Canadian steel to deliver Canadian energy to a Canadian refinery, perhaps right here in St. John. And that will cause a massive economic boom. Billions of dollars will flood into our government coffers from the resulting economic growth, money that can be used to improve our failing hospitals and our schools, building roads and other infrastructure we need, defeating poverty and lifting up our people, giving new jobs to our young tradespeople, 350,000 of whom we are going to train up through our Boots Not Suits plan. It will mean a new era of prosperity, and it adds to a broader plan that we've been systematically unveiling. For example, just yesterday, I announced the Canada First reinvestment tax cut. Zero capital gains tax if you reinvest in Canada. You sell your business and you reinvest in a Canadian stock that funds Canadian economic growth, zero capital gains tax. You sell a rental property and reinvest it in building a new home in Canada, zero capital gains tax. You're a company that wants to sell a vacant piece of land to reinvest in building a new factory in Canada, zero capital gains tax. You want to take your money out of Canada to a foreign jurisdiction, you will pay capital gains tax. That's why it's called Canada First. We're going to be bringing home hundreds of billions of dollars and unleashing a boom. This will be economic rocket fuel for our Canadians to launch above and beyond the Americans. We will cut income tax by 15% for the average worker and senior. That means that more of your pension and your paycheck will go home to your family rather than into government coffers. And speaking of home, we'll get rid of the GST. We will axe the federal sales tax on new homes, saving you up to $65,000 on a purchase or $3,000 a year in lower mortgage payments. And we will axe the carbon tax. But unlike the Liberals who brought in the tax and who are just going to hide it for the next month leading up to the election, we will axe the tax for everyone, for everywhere, for good, for real, for a change. We will unleash an incredible economic boom that will turn Canada into a fortress. We'll honor the legacy of John A. MacDonald and Louis St.Laurent by adding pipelines, power lines, roads, rail that bind the nation together. One nation, bound together into a united country, self-reliant, sovereign, standing on its own 2 feet and standing up to the Americans from a position of strength. The choice is clear. After the lost Liberal decade of costs and crime up and the economy down under the American thumb, can we afford to give Liberals a 4th term? Or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources to bring home our jobs so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength? Canada first for a change. Let's bring it home.
Thank you. We will now take questions from the floor.
With St. John being the most trade-prone city in Canada and New Brunswick sending 92% of its exports to the United States, what would Conservative government do to help through this trade war and beyond?
Thank you. That's a very good question. This is one of the most trade-intensive economies in the world, St. John in particular, New Brunswick in general. We'll make sure that businesses have the cash they need, the liquidity required to pay their bills and keep people working. Our goal is to keep people working through this trade dispute. And furthermore, we need to retaliate against the Americans targeting goods we don't need, can make ourselves, or get elsewhere, so we maximize the impact on them while minimizing the impact on ourselves. Then I will present President Trump with a choice. Either you start a trade war with America's closest friend and neighbor, which will weaken both our economies, rendering our continent more vulnerable to risks from abroad, or you knock down the trade barriers, we trade more as two separate sovereign nations, we enrich both sides of the border, allowing us to spend massively on our military, so that both Canada and the U.S. separately, but cooperating together, are stronger, safer, and richer. I believe, presented with that choice, particularly as they get closer to midterm elections, I think that the Americans will, in the end, be forced to reverse these disastrous tariff policies. But we can't rely on the Americans to determine our economic destiny. Your question, it contains in it the problem. Why is it that after the lost Liberal decade, we are so dependent on the Americans for everything? For example, if the Energy East pipeline were approved today, there would be 1 million barrels of oil going from St. John to Europe. It's almost $100 million, depending on the price of oil. It's almost $100 million a day that would be transiting through here, paying refinery workers and all the businesses that they shop at around here to sell to Europe, and the Americans wouldn't be able to do a damn thing about it because it would have been a direct transit out of North America to an overseas economy. We need to bring that home. If we had a national energy corridor today, St. John would not be so reliant on the Americans. We'd be able to transit in billions and billions of dollars through this incredible city without worrying about what the Americans think. That is what we're trying to do with this Canada First policy. And the choice in the election is, after a lost Liberal decade, with costs and crime up and the economy down under the American thumb, do they deserve a fourth term in power, or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build a national corridor, ship our resources around the world while bringing powerful paychecks home, making us strong enough to stand up to the Americans? Thank you.
Good morning. Just going back to the energy corridor, what would that mean for Energy East? And has a private investor come forward to reignite that plan that's been dead long ago?
So you're right to point out that the Energy East project was killed by the previous Liberal government, and right now, today, it would be impossible for any pipeline to be built because there's a no new pipelines law, C-69, that the Liberals have passed into law and kept in place with Mark Carney's support. People say, well, there's no company to build it. Well, of course, when pipelines are banned, you're not going to get a company to step up and announce they're building a pipeline. When you have a new government that repeals the anti-pipeline Liberal law, and then you put in place a pre-approved corridor that removes the uncertainty, all of a sudden it becomes very attractive. So the chicken and egg problem we have today is that as long as the anti-pipeline law and government are in place, no one is going to put their name forward to build anything in Canada, even as pipeline construction is booming all around the world, because pipelines are, of course, so wildly profitable. The only way that you get the investment is to repeal the anti-pipeline law and bring in a pre-approved corridor so businesses know they will never again have to spend 7 years and $1 billion to get to a dead end. You, in fact, give them the corridor that gives them the light at the end of the tunnel and a certainty for the future. That's how you put Canada first. And then the choice in this election is the following. After the lost Liberal decade, where they blocked Energy East along with $178 billion of projects, should we elect them to a fourth term? Or is it time for a new Conservative government that will put Canada first by rapidly building a national energy corridor, cutting taxes, and bringing home the billions of dollars Liberals pushed out of Canada so that we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength?
English, en français.
Thank you. The question was about rural and remote communities in New Brunswick and other smaller towns that have already been hit by this terrible trade dispute. The question was whether what actions we should take to protect those jobs. We will make sure that businesses have the support they need to keep their workers in their jobs through the dispute. We would hate for the disruption of what might be a temporary dispute to cause long-term unemployment. So let's try to keep our workers working. They want jobs. They don't want unemployment. But we also have to ask ourselves, why are we in such a helpless position after the lost Liberal decade, where the Americans get 75% of our exports, 100% of our oil, 100% of our gas, 90% of our oil, almost all of our forestry products. The reason is that Liberal anti-resource laws, they've blocked our projects, they've taxed away $500 billion of investment that has now gone south. They've crippled and weakened our country. And so after the last Liberal decade, can we really afford to elect them a fourth time? Or is it time to put Canada first for a change, with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, greenlight resource projects, and bring home the hundreds of billions of dollars the Liberals have pushed out of Canada, so that we can stand on our own 2 feet, stand up to the Americans from a position of strength. That's what it means to put Canada first for a change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes today's press conference.
All right.